In this video we'll create the skateboard using a polygon, the extrude tool, and the edge loop tool. We'll start by importing the template to give us some reference on what we need to design. I'll start by holding down my spacebar, going to create, and choosing free image plane. If I was to go to the channel box by hitting Control A or clicking on the right hand edge of the app, I'll see a folder in which I can import that UV template. As soon as I've brought it in, I'll click on the little plate with the blue ball on it to add it to its own layer. I'll double click on the layer 1 and I'll name it template. Now I'm going to rotate it so it's flat on the XZ axes. So in my channel box, I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees on the x-axis. And I'll pull it down below the XZ axis. And I guess I'll move it back towards the center. We'll lock it down in this position so that when we introduce geometry, it'll be floating above the template. We don't have to worry about it being hidden inside the template. So once I've done that, I'll go over to my layer window. And in this open blue box, I'll click twice so the letter R appears, and that will restrict it. Now we're going to look at two ways in which we can make the board shape. I'm going to start in the top view. Now the grid can kind of interfere a bit here, so I'll turn off the grid inside the viewport. You'll see right below panels here, I'll click there and the grid is hidden. I'm going to be using the Bezier curve tool. Holding down the space bar, I'll go to Create, Curve Tools, and I'll click on Bezier tool. I'll zoom in and I'll start to drop points. Now the fewer points the better, it'll give you better curves. I'll start to go around the perimeter. I'll put one here in the center of that curve on this side, and another one here, and I'll pull as I do this to get the curve, and then I'm going to stop just short of where I began. So if I was to zoom in on this now and turn off my template, you can see I have an open edge, and that's how we want to start with this. Now once I've got the shape I want, I would hold down my space bar, I'll go to curves, and I'll click on open close, and you'll see the shape has been closed. And we're looking at something like this. Now if I needed to, I could right click, go to control vertex, and I could go and straighten these out. I'll select these two, I'll hit F on the keyboard, and I'll just tweak this one a bit maybe. And then I'll right click and go back to my object mode. Now quickly I'll go into Illustrator and I'll show you, if you know how to use Illustrator, how fast you could generate this without dealing with this tool at all. I've opened up a new file inside of Illustrator and I'm going to go over to the toolbar and I'm going to select the rounded rectangle tool. Now I would have brought the template in, but once I get this in, I can use the template to fine tune it if I wanted to. I'll click and drag, and you can see immediately the shape that you're going to be getting. I'll click on the circles in the middle, I'll round it out, and then I'll go to File, Save As, and I'll name it. And I have to make sure that I save it in the proper version. So up at the top, I'll click on Illustrator 2020 or whatever appears there, and I'll choose Illustrator 8. So now if I wanted to, I could import this into Maya. Now I want to import that AI file, so I'll go to File, and I'll go to Import, or Command-I if you choose, and I'll locate the file. Clicking on the Skateboard AI, I'll hit Import, and you'll see it'll come in kind of vertical instead of horizontal. So I'll select the shape, I'll center the pivot, and then I'm going to hold down X on the keyboard and snap it to the grid. I'll rotate it 90 degrees on the x-axis, and then I can go and start to scale this. I've turned on my template again, and now I'll go ahead in my top view and I'll just scale that to the proportions of my skateboard. Next we want to make this into a piece of geometry. So with either one selected, I'll hold down my space bar, and I'm going to go to Surfaces, Bevel Plus, and I'll go to the Attributes. Now in here, I'm going to get rid of the bevel. I don't want a bevel, that's optional. So the width and the depth have been zeroed out. And then I'm going to click on Output Options, and this allows me to change this feature so that I get the rounded edges I want. In order to do that, I'll click on Count, and I'll leave the default of 200 and hit Apply. I'm going to put that on its own layer for now and turn it off so that we can go in and start on the axle and the wheel for the bottom of the board. To create the axle, we'll start off with polygon cube, and then we'll use the extrude tool and the edge loop tool to refine it. I'll return to my top view. And if I look at my template, I can create the footprint for the initial polygon shape here. Holding down the spacebar, I'll go to create polygon primitives cube. I'll click and drag the footprint in the top view. Going to my perspective view, I'll give it some thickness. Now, I'm going to right click and choose face, and I'll delete the bottom face to economize on our polys. And now I'm going to select the edges along the top and on the sides. To do that, I'll go to an orthographic view, return to my perspective view. I'm going to go to Edit Mesh, and I'm going to go to the Bevel tool, and I'll go to the Attributes. I've set the segments for 2 and the width to 0.2. And now we'll begin to extrude the other geometry we want here. I'll right click and choose face. I'll select the face in the middle. I'll click on my extrude tool, and I'm going to hit my scale tool, and I'll just pull that in to establish the size of the base that we see here. Once I've done that, I'll either click on the extrude tool or hit G to repeat it. And I'll scale it in to taper it. I'll hit G on the keyboard one more time. And I'll just go in and kind of replicate this as closely as I can. As long as you're starting to getting a structure like this, it's perfectly fine. And I'll go ahead and click and put one more in. And let's pull that up. And that'll be as high as it would be. And now I'm going to start working on the T shape that we see here. I'll be using the extrude tool again. So I'll right click and I'll choose face. And I'm going to choose this face and this one because we can extrude these out at the same time and we'll have the symmetry. Now if I click on my extrude tool, you'll see that if we were to go and start to pull, it'll go on either side as long as the blue dial is where it was originally. It'll be against one of the poly faces. So essentially I can pull that out and I can scale that in and taper it a bit. Now if I want to move these faces up a little bit, I would click here and then I can move this way. So we have the option of going back and forth to create this shape depending on what part of it we're making. I'll click on my extrude tool again or hit G and I'll pull it out, clicking the scale option. I'll taper both sides. And I'll add one more. And all I'm doing is starting to establish the thinner piece that we see here that goes to the wheels. That's pretty good. So now I'll just click on my extrude tool or hit G and I'll pull it out to get the length. We can always adjust these once we actually have the wheels. I'll right click and I'll choose object mode and I'll save. So we just created that axle we need. And now we'll go ahead and we'll create the wheel. I've turned my template back on and I've gone to my top view. Now to make the wheel, it's pretty simple. We're going to be using a curve tool and then we're going to use the surfaces revolve. Holding down the space bar, I'll go to create curve tool and I think I'll go ahead and I'll use the Bezier once again. And I'll zoom in on this and I'll start here and I'll click and curve it a little bit in like that to make it a bit concave on that side. And I'll just go around, create something that looks like a wheel, and then I'll stop here. I'll hit return to set the curve and I'm going to turn the template off. So this is the shape we're looking at now, and I'll right click and I'll choose control vertex. And maybe up here I want this one, I want to have it straighter perhaps. So if I wanted to, I could hold down the option key and with my right arrow I could move that so it's a bit straighter, and then I'll return to my object mode. Now to get the wheel shape we need to revolve it, and we have to find the axis on which to do that. I'll first center the pivot, I'll hit W, and I'm going to hold down D on the keyboard because I want to revolve this at this point roughly. So I've got the axis where I want, and it's going to be revolved on the Z axis. Holding down my space bar, surfaces, I'll go to revolve, attributes, and I'll set it for Z, and I want it to be polygon quads, and I'll just set the default to 200 again. See what it gives me, and then I'll hit apply. So I want this to be a little bit rounder. I can tell already, here's my curve, here's my geometry. So I'll Z it out. I'll increase the polygon count to 300. I'll click on apply. I'm going to hit 3 on the keyboard because if I ran the smooth on, this is what I would get. So I'm going to leave it like that for the time being. I'll go to my perspective window and I'm going to center the pivot. I may want this to be a little wider. which means I would just hit R on the keyboard, and I'll just do something like that. Now we've got a bit of an opening here that I want to get rid of. This will be the outside. So I'm going to hit 1 on the keyboard so I can see my exact polygon and vertex locations. I'm going to right click and choose vertex. I'll hit 4, and I want to select just this. So I'm going to manipulate this so that when I marquee select, I get just that. I'll go up to edit mesh, and I'll choose merge to center. So now we have our wheel. Now all we would do is put this together with the 3 other wheels we need and the axles. We'll start to assemble the whole thing by setting up the wheels on the axle and then duplicating the axle with the wheels to go on the other side of the board. I'll start by selecting the wheel, W on the keyboard. I'm going to delete the history, freeze the transforms, and I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees on the Y. Then I'll start to put it in position. Going to my orthographic top view, and then F, and then I'll just zoom back so I can see what I'm working with here. I'll hit 4 so I can see the wireframe, and I'll put 1 there, and then I'll duplicate it, and I'm going to rotate that one so that the wheel's pretty much symmetrical as far as the concave area on the front. So I'm going to put -90 for this. I'll marquee select those 3 elements and hit Command G. I'll center the pivot, and I'll name the group. Now I'll turn on my board. I've turned on my board, and now I'm going to rotate it on the Y-axis. Going to my top view, I'll start to line it up and scale it the way I want. Put the template on. I kind of like the bigger wheels on this, so I'm going to leave it like that. Going to my perspective view, I'll select my wheels. I've got to put those back up closer to the actual axle. I'll hit the up arrow to get the whole thing. I'll go ahead back to my top view. I'm going to hit 5 on the keyboard just to see how it lines up with the geometry. Okay, with the wheel assembly selected, I'll hit Command D, and I'll just drag the other wheels over to that side. So if I was to turn off my template, now I'll group the whole thing. I'll rotate it so that the wheels are actually on the XZ-axis, and then we'll next start the texturing. Marquee and selecting, Command G, centering the pivot. I'll rotate on the Z-axis 180, and now we're ready to do the texturing.